We're going to look at a particular issue, like, let's say, GMOs, whether they're harmful or not, then we should be consulting the global evidence. When we were speaking in the coffee break, you said to me, well, in America they're using these crops and no one is suffering from them. And this is evidence that can be brought to bear here in Kenya. So I'm a strong believer that we should look at global evidence and adapting it for local use. The evidence-based movement is not a blueprint approach. It's not saying, okay, it worked in Kansas, let's do it in Kenya. It's, well, it worked in Kansas, let's try it out here, let's test it here, let's use randomized controlled trials here to test it, and then adopt it here or adapt it here if it works. So that's the essence of what we're trying to do. Someone used this expression, how to make a difference. What we're about, why we do what we do, is to make a difference. To make a difference to farmers in terms of their farming practices, to make a difference to people in terms of their dietary practices, and to do that so that actually we can lift farmers out of poverty, improve their livelihoods, stop children going to bed hungry, stop children dying unnecessarily prematurely. We want to make a difference. That's why we do what we do, and that's why evidence matters so much, because of the billions, I mean billions, billions and billions of dollars being wasted every year on programs that simply don't work. We heard examples already. Many things we do don't work. Often because there's no evidence being collected to show they work or not. Evidence is being collected to show they don't work, but people are unaware of evidence and keep doing things that are failing. There's a lot of evidence out there, we've heard this, not being used. We need rigorous evidence synthesis to show what works and what doesn't. But this is not easy, and it needs scientists to be involved to do high quality evidence synthesis, to distill the high quality evidence for policymakers to be used compared to low quality, impressionistic, anecdotal evidence, or even low quality research, of which unfortunately there is still quite a lot. I'm going to begin with an example, not from African agriculture, but actually from developed country, but it's about food, and it's very specifically, so how to make a difference, use evidence, very specifically about dietary practices in developed countries, where most governments in developed countries in Europe have recommended government advice that people should eat 5 pieces of fresh vegetables a day in order to stay healthy. A couple of years ago, or 3 years ago now, a study came out saying, actually, probably can't see this down the bottom there, but it's up the top, actually you should eat 7 pieces a day. So 5 a day is not enough, the government advice is wrong, you actually need to eat 7 pieces of fresh veg a day to stay healthy, to actually reduce the risk of dying. It's not like, oh, you might get a cold more often. You'll die if you don't do this. It's quite important. Yes? So you should have 7 pieces a day rather than 5. This was reported in the BBC. So what we would think would be a credible source of knowledge about science evidence. 2 months later, the BBC carried another story saying more than 5 a day has no effect. Okay, so here we have not even apparently contradictory evidence, we have clearly contradictory evidence about how many pieces of fruit and vegetables you should eat. Clearly policymakers say, you scientists, you just don't know what to think. You're always changing your mind, why should I listen to you? The answer is, we actually know which of these stories is right and which is wrong. And we can do that by going back to the original studies. Here's the 7-piece study. It's published in a peer-reviewed journal, and it has a graph, very scientific, showing a reference category of 0, people that never eat a piece of fruit or vegetable in their lives. And the more you eat, then the higher the decrease in the risk of dying. So this is quite important stuff. So you're 42% less likely to die in a particular period if you eat 7 pieces or more of fruit and vegetables a day, compared to people who don't eat any at all. This seems like, oh wow, I'm going to go out and get some apples or mangoes or whatever right now, yes? Right? However, what we should note is that these are observational data, simply looking at correlations in the data, seeing that people who eat more than 7 pieces of fruit and vegetables a day are much less likely to die. What do we know about people that eat more than 7 pieces of fruit and vegetables a day? They're not normal, okay? This is not normal behaviour. People that do that spend their whole time eating fruit and vegetables and going to the gym and running around the roads and stuff. Okay, these are very health conscious people. Okay, so they're doing lots of things to improve their health, including eating lots of fruit and vegetables, but they also do these other things. More seriously, there's a serious problem of selection bias here. People who have this behaviour are more likely to be wealthy, they're more likely to be better educated and so on, all of which are correlated with the chances of lower risk of death. This analysis of correlation does not allow us to establish a causal relationship between dietary practices and the probability of death. There may be one, but this evidence doesn't tell us that. This is low quality research. What the BBC should have said, it's a scandal, someone funded this research and a journal published it. That's the story here. Here's the 5-piece study. Again, a nice graph, this time with confidence intervals. And here we have a hazard ratio showing that the risk of dying reduces the more fruit and vegetables you eat, but it plateaus at 5. Eating more than 5 a day has no effect. Where does this evidence come from? It's a systematic review including 16 high-quality studies. Now, they are based on observational data because there aren't any randomised controlled trials of dietary practices. People aren't willing to eat no fruit and vegetables and die as a result. But what they do is only include studies that do try and control for the confounders like education and wealth. So only the high quality studies get included, and that shows very clearly support for existing government guidelines to eat 5 pieces of fruit and vegetables a day. So systematic reviews, that's rigorous evidence synthesis of what programs work and why and so on, matter because they correlation is not causation, and good reviews only include high quality evidence of effects coming from experimental, randomised controlled trials, designs, or non-experimental designs which take into account selection bias in some way. So, only getting high quality evidence. Systematic reviews are part of the evidence revolution. So randomised controlled trials, these are what we call primary studies, are an important part of that revolution, valid non-experimental designs. And that evidence from these studies gets summarised in systematic reviews, which are not much known currently by African policymakers or African researchers, and that's what we're trying at Campbell to do. Campbell International Research Network is to make this better known. The evidence revolution in both developed and developing countries is most strongly rooted in evidence-based medicine. And that's been supported by our sister organisation called the Cochrane Collaboration. Actually now just goes under the name of Cochrane. And this is the Cochrane logo. The Cochrane logo is a stylized representation of something called a forest plot. You're going to be seeing a lot of these in the next 20 minutes. Okay, so a forest plot summarises available evidence of effects, how effective an intervention is. And this is a forest plot of giving corticosteroid injections to women about to deliver prematurely. Premature infants are much more likely to die soon after birth, and giving this injection is meant to reduce the risk of death to children born prematurely. In this forest plot, the vertical line is the line of no effect. The study found that giving this injection had no effect on children dying prematurely. Each horizontal line is a study, where the length of the line represents a confidence interval. If a line lies entirely to the left of the vertical line, then the study finds no effect. The study finds it reduces the risk of death. If a line crosses the vertical line, it finds no effect. So there are 7 studies here of whether giving this injection makes a difference or not. 7 studies, 5 of them find no effect, but 2 find it reduces the risk of death. An approach called vote counting, which is very common, where you simply add up, well, 5 studies say no effect, 2 say it does. So on balance, while the evidence is mixed, on balance it doesn't seem to work. There is no mixed evidence. There's only incorrectly synthesized evidence. And to say this is, it doesn't work on balance is incorrectly synthesizing evidence. When you do something called meta-analysis, where you summarize all the effect sizes, make an average across them, then you find, as that little diamond at the bottom, you find that giving this injection actually causes a 30 to 50% reduction in mortality. That's a huge effect. 30 to 50% reduction in mortality from a very cheap injection given to women about to give birth prematurely. Because of this evidence, because of this review, this procedure is now standard in hospitals around the world and has saved literally hundreds of thousands of lives because the evidence was synthesised in the correct way using high quality evidence synthesis. Doing vote counting, I was saying it's five saying no effect, is misleading. Vote counting in this case would literally kill babies, because babies would be dying daily because this procedure had not been adopted because of low quality evidence synthesis. We should not allow low quality research to influence policy. So reviews can tell you many things. They can tell you what works, but a good systematic review of social programs and cultural programs tells you also who it works for, in what context it works for, looks at the causal chain, and talks about at what cost it does that. We can do that best, of course, if the primary studies also do that. So the impact evaluations also look at the causal chain and so on. And they can lead to policy relevant conclusions, provided they look at the causal chain, and they can use qualitative data on things like barriers to participation, which we heard about earlier on. Farmers, common failing in many development programs is we think training works. Training doesn't work. As we heard, I used to be a lecturer. The first time I marked the exams of students, I wanted to cry. You would think, I told them this 3 times, why aren't they getting it right? Because it's not just farmers that don't learn stuff and being told stuff, university students too don't learn stuff and being told stuff. Traditional pedagogy is just very bad. Okay, we need to find better ways of communicating for people to actually internalise and use the information. We know, in communication, there's a saying, you have to say the same things 7 times in 7 different ways, and also if you don't use it, you lose it. We have to use this knowledge we have about how to communicate successfully in order to have successful programs. So I'm going to give, I think it's 4 examples now of evidence synthesis, or one study in Western health emphasis. First is payment for environmental services. This is where you pay farmers not to cut down trees. We're trying to conserve forests. So they get paid not to cut down the trees. There's a Campbell review of this that summarises the evidence from 5 studies that basically says, if you look at the black diamond is the one to look at, it finds an effect, but that effect actually is very small. Okay, and I'll come back to that. The size of the effect means that there's a 0.3% reduction in deforestation. That means if you do this program for 10 years and you're paying farmers not to cut down the trees, 97% of the land you're paying for the farmers not to cut down the trees, they would not have cut down those trees even in the absence of the payments. We're summarising counterfactual evidence here. What would have happened with the money compared to without the money? Without the money, 97% of those trees would still be standing if you hadn't had the programme 10 years later. Only 3% of the trees you're paying for have been saved. So this is hugely cost ineffective. You're paying loads of money for things that is making no difference. So it's not at all cost effective, the way of doing payment for environmental services. So I presented this review in Norway, where they like trees a lot, there are a lot of them, they pay a lot of forestry programs in developing countries. And I was told, but there's a review by EVA, a Swedish development agency looking at development programs, saying that payment environmental service programs are effective. We come up against this problem again of contradictory findings from research. The EVA review says they work, we say they don't work, well, it's not cost effective. Let's look at the difference between the programs. The 11th EVA review says we looked at 11 studies of pests and more than half judged the intervention to be successful. What's wrong with this? What did they do wrong, in my view? First of all, they did vote counting. They said, okay, there are 11 studies, 7 say it works, so on balance it works. That is the wrong way to look at programs are effective. It means also they don't look at the size of the effects. Because what we found in the Campbell study is there is an effect, but it is very small. There's a range of effect sizes we talk about called a D, and anything less than 0.2 D is considered small. The D in this study was 0.05, it's tiny, so it's negligible. And they they adopted, we only have 5 studies in our review, they had 11. Why is that? That's because they adopted what they called generous screening criteria. In other words, they included low quality studies. They include before versus after studies with no control group. That doesn't give you a valid estimate of effects. And the lower the quality of the study, the more likely it is to find an effect or a bigger effect. That's well established across many, many reviews. So including low quality studies meant it's more likely to have an impact, even though there's only a very small one. So the Campbell review doesn't say it doesn't work, but the effect size is very small. The Ebber review is misleading. It summarises the same evidence, but actually comes to a misleading finding because it's a low quality review. If you're going to do these reviews, you have to do high quality reviews. That's what Campbell stands for and promotes. So there's 2 examples from that, from 2 points from PES. One's that quality matters, second you need to do cost effectiveness, and you can get policy relevant findings. If you want to conserve forests, probably best to find another way to do it. But if you really want to use PES, then think about the targeting or the screening of the programme. So you're paying for land that probably the farmers will be cutting down the trees. We all know that a lot of rural households don't have a labour to cultivate all their land. There's a lot of land that's actually not arable because it's on rocky ground or slopey ground. Don't use pests in those circumstances. The second example is from a primary study, not from a review, but it makes a couple of nice points. It's from here in Kenya. It's quite an old study by World Bank of the training and visit extension programme. Those of you who are old like me, Professor here, remember the training and visit was very popular back in the 80s, and donors around the world saying, you have to do T&V. You want to increase yield, you have to do T&V. That's the way to go. Donors like fads, like pushing these fads on hapless governments. Okay, so the study done by World Bank found actually T&V had no impact on yield here in Kenya. And it looked at the causal chain to say why, and there were a couple of reasons. One was that part of the project was to do research in research stations to inform the advice given by extension workers to the farmers. That link was broken. So there was research going on in the research stations supported by the project, but there was no communication channel for that evidence to actually get taken up by the extension services. The result was, the second broken link, that actually the extension workers were telling farmers to do things they were already doing. They weren't going and doing innovative ideas, they were telling to do things they were doing already, so there was no impact on agricultural practice, so there's no impact on yields. So looking at the causal chain is very important for understanding the presence or absence of effects. Third example is important subgroup analysis and qualitative data. This is the case of land reform. So privatising land titles, basically. Land reform does improve the productivity and income of those receiving title for the land they receive title for, but not in Africa. So the study broke down different countries, and it found in regions, it found Latin America and Asia, that land titling was effective in improving productivity and yields and income, but not in Africa. So I have Latin America and Asia, but not in Africa. Didn't have enough studies to learn why that is. But the other point was that the qualitative data show impoverishing effect on those who lose land rights as a result. We got this study in Campbell looking just at the quantitative data. Now, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm English and I like to read English history. The history of England from the 1300s to the 1600s is a history of peasant revolt against land privatisation. In Ireland and Scotland in the 1800s, you had massive privatisation of land resulting in mass migration and starvation. So this is not something that actually necessarily goes so easily. So I asked, but what about those that lose land entitlements? And none of the quantitative studies look at that, so it wasn't included in the review. So they looked at qualitative data, and they found, well, actually there's a lot of qualitative data showing that, say, women lose access to land with private land titles and so on, and this loss of land rights can lead to impoverishment. So a policy relevant finding there, to be aware of the vulnerable groups that lose access when you privatise land. The fourth example is a bit more extended, and it talks about farmer field schools we heard about. You're not going to like what I'm going to say. So they've been very successful since they spread across from Indonesia. These are quite old data now, so around getting up to 500,000 farmers around the world. 10 to 12 million beneficiary farmers in 500,000 farm field school programs across the world, including many in Kenya. So spread out across time. These are programs intended to increase both farming yields and income, but also usually have an empowerment component. 2/3 of farmer field schools we looked at, and a lot of them we looked at, had empowerment amongst the objectives. Though none of the quantitative studies had looked at the impact on empowerment. So something's meant to be an objective is not being measured, there's something wrong there. But let's look at the impact on farming outcomes. And what we see is that farmer field schools work very successfully across the causal chain for participating farmers, those that take part in the farm field schools, but not for their neighbours. Part of the theory of change of farmer field schools is that the benefits will spill over to neighbouring farmers. That doesn't seem to happen. So in the forest plot here, remember each line is a study and the diamond summarises the effect size. The first batch, the top half of the diagram, is participating farmers, and we see here knowledge test scores, knowledge about good farming practices, does increase in participating farmers. It does not increase, the diamond crosses the vertical line at the bottom, does not increase for neighbouring farmers, for neighbours in the same communities as the participating farmers. This is not the control group. The control group is in other communities, it's a cluster of sites. These are non-participating farmers in the same villages. No effect on knowledge. So, not surprisingly, pesticide use, farmer field schools are usually about pesticide control. Pesticide use falls, now in the bottom half of the figure, pesticide use falls among participating farmers, there's the bottom part of the figure, can't see it at the back, but does not change amongst non-participating farmers. No spillover effect. So again, yields go up, participating farmers, bottom of the diagram, not amongst non-participating farmers. A lot of evidence being synthesised here from around the world. And so net revenue goes up for participating farmers, not for non-participating. So the causal chain here holds true for people taking part in farmer field schools. That they change their farming practices, they reduce pesticide use, yields and net income go up. It's a positive story. I'll come to the but in a moment. But there are no spillover effects. We looked at targeting, how the schools, they're targeted, and lots of questions around who participates, how it's targeting, and so on. I'll move quickly through that to the main findings. Some programs actually target groups who are not the poor, and some target the poor. Some programs say we're going for the vulnerable, for the marginalised, for women, the poor, and so on. But some say we're actually going to go after members of existing groups, those who are more educated, those that grow certain crops that may well be the better off. And so some farmer field schools target the better off, where some target the less well off. There's about half-half that split. Here's a couple of examples of evidence on targeting. So in Indonesia, they targeted people in existing groups having access to irrigation, being literate, and being high social standing. So in Indonesia, they were targeting the better off, and they reached them. They actually did reach those groups. In Liberia, the second examples, the idea was to have 50-50 men and women in the farm field schools groups. But actually, it's mostly men that participated. Why? Women lacked access to tools and land, they didn't have time, and there was no creches provided. Many community programs have to provide a creche for the women to be able to take part, and they needed husband's permission, which they weren't getting. So the targeting failed to reach women in that particular program. So the overall narrative synthesis for targeting is that farmer field schools have reached their target groups, where those target groups have been better off farmers. Where those farmers have been not so well off farmers or marginalised groups, targeting has sometimes worked less well. The big but here is farmer field schools work, but in pilot programs. The limited evidence we have, and it is limited evidence, is when they've been taken to scale, they have no effect. The only studies of farmer field schools at scale find no effect on the outcomes of interest. And the qualitative data give reasons why that probably is. Farmer field schools is a participatory model where the farmers themselves are empowered to experiment themselves and learn from participatory experiential learning of how to change farming practices. If you're going to roll out the farm field school model through Agricultural Extension Service, that's not the way agricultural extension workers think. They're used to a traditional top-down approach of telling farmers what to do. And so reskilling them to have that more participatory approach is not easy, and it requires a different skill set they may not have. They don't have the skills for it, they don't have the attitude for it, and they're not trained in facilitation. If you look at the training programs for facilitators, it's usually around technical content, it's not around actually how to be a good facilitator. And often they're very basic things like not speaking the local language. So we heard about using vernacular about crops, it's very important. You just don't speak the local language, then clearly you're not going to communicate successfully with farmers. So policy conclusions on farmer field schools, if you're going to do them, be clear on the target group. If it is not the better off, you have to think very strongly about the barriers to those people taking part in the programme. I'll be speaking about barriers in my afternoon presentation in one of the panel sessions. If you're going to scale, pay attention to appropriateness, training quality of facilitation, because that's really what stops it going to scale successfully. And don't expect spillovers. So when you do your cost-benefit analysis, don't count in spillover effects into that analysis, because they're not happening. The general essence of all these studies, and many other studies Campbell's done, in both developing and developing countries, is implementation matters. You can't just do a program like we heard and say, oh, let's train some farmers. Because we actually don't know how to do that properly, and we don't implement it properly. And so if we just have, in our M&E system, we trained 260 farmers, and our target was 200, we're doing very well. No, you're not. Doing very well is actually farmers changing knowledge and practice. Now, you're not checking on that, and testing the impact there, you haven't actually got successful programs. Implementation is what is the key here. We've seen example after example. You've got to implement the programs, you've got to target the programs, make sure they're working down at the ground level. So in conclusion, the evidence revolution is here, and you really are with us or against us. Large parts of the M&E community, particularly in developed countries, particularly the European Evaluation Association, American Evaluation Association, are against the evidence revolution. It sounds contradictory, but traditional evaluators who do process evaluations don't like rigorous impact evaluation, many of them. It doesn't make sense to me, because a good mixed method impact evaluation uses process evaluation methods as well, should be joining forces with those people to actually do integrated mixed method analysis. But they are very opposed to, say RCTs aren't appropriate, you can't do RCTs in this sector or that sector. It's simply not true. When I was running the 3IE, we were funding over 200 RCTs in over 50 countries across all sectors. You can do this anywhere. You can always think of it as an RCT design that is appropriate. If it's ex post, okay, it's ex post, we can't do an RCT, but you can always do something to determine impact. So you really need to get on board with revolution. So it's a call for high quality impact evaluations, preferably RCTs, which look also at process implementation issues and collect cost data. Both of those things are very important. Far less positive. And that evidence then gets synthesized in high quality reviews. And this is why I think our partnership with ICED is so important, because ICED, as we heard, is a global evidence body based in Africa. We want to be producing evidence, reviews of global evidence for African policy produced by Africans here in Africa for Africans to use. So Campbell supports that by supporting the global evidence body of global evidence. You see me taking a step back, because deliberately Campbell stepped back from that process. It's not our job to be producing African evidence for Africans policymakers. That's your job and your job and your job, your job and your job. Yes, it's not mine. What we can do is provide the infrastructure for high quality research synthesis to be done. We can help support high quality research synthesis methods, but actually doing that work and communicating to local policymakers, that's not my job, it's not my role, it's your role. And you really want to improve agriculture, you really want to improve the livelihoods of people in rural areas, you really want to reduce poverty, you really want children not to go to bed hungry, then you've got to join the evidence revolution. and that's about doing high quality evaluations, not low quality evaluations, there are too many of those, and doing high quality evidences, and making sure that evidence gets used in policy. Thank you. So please do visit our website and sign up for our newsletter. I just very quickly, one quick advert. For those from Uganda, we stop children going to bed hungry, stop children dying unnecessarily prematurely. We want to make a difference. That's why we do what we do, and that's why evidence matters so much, because of the billions, I mean billions and billions of dollars being wasted every year on programs that simply don't work. The information. We know, I mean, in communication, there's a saying, you have to say the same things 7 times in 7 different ways, and also if you don't use it, you lose it. We have to use this knowledge we have about how to communicate successfully in order to have successful programs. So I'm going to give, I think it's 4 examples now of evidence synthesis, or one study in domestic evidences. First is payment for environmental services. This is where you pay farmers not to cut down trees. You're trying to conserve forests. So they get paid not to cut down the trees. The study broke down in different countries, and it found in regions, it found Latin America and Asia, that land titling was effective in improving productivity and yields and income, but not in Africa. So I have Latin America and Asia, but not in Africa. We're not quite, didn't have good enough studies to learn why that is. Private land titles and so on, and this loss of land rights does can lead to impoverishment. So a policy relevant findings, that doesn't seem to happen. So in the forest plot here, remember each line is a study, and the diamond summarises the effect size. The first batch, the top half of the diagram, is participating farmers, and we see here knowledge test scores, knowledge about good farming practices, does increase in participating farmers. It does not increase, the diamond crosses the vertical line at the bottom, does not increase for neighbouring farmers, for neighbours in the same communities as the participating farmers. This is not the control group. The control group is in other communities, cluster sites. These are non-participating farmers in the same villages. No effect on knowledge. So, not surprisingly, pesticide use, farmer field schools are usually about pesticide control. Pesticide use falls, now in the bottom half of the figure, pesticide use falls among participating farmers, that's the bottom part of the figure, can't see at the back, but does not change amongst non-participating farmers. No spillover effect. So if there's synthesis to be done, we can help support high quality research synthesis methods, but actually doing that work and communicating to local policymakers, that's not my job, it's not my role, it's your role. And if you really want to improve agriculture, if you really want to improve the livelihoods of people in rural areas, if you really want to reduce poverty, if you really want children not to go to bed hungry, then you've got to join the evidence revolution. And that's about doing high quality evaluations, not low quality evaluations, there are too many of those, and doing high quality evidences, and making sure that evidence gets used in policy. Thank you. So please do visit our website.
Evidence and scale. And maybe using your example of the farmer field schools, where you said that, as a pilot it worked really well, but when it went to scale it didn't, because you're scaling in a different system. And when you generate evidence from a certain system, and if the system itself is the problem, and when you talk about evidence to action, if action is brought to bear on the system, it will then lead to impact and so on. How do you deal with that kind of situation where then the evidence might be misleading because the problem is a system in which it's collected, like perhaps the agricultural extension system that cannot change or adapt to the kind of more participatory farmer field school?
We are happy about this meeting because it really brings out what we do at Tegemeo, evidence-based. I just wanted to the team in this room, just bringing out the difficulty that we have, bringing in the learning culture. To what extent can national, not the city centers, not the international centers, engage in this generating high quality evidence from experiments, for example? What kind of models can we use? We are not in the learning culture. If you make a wrong thing, in Kenya, for example, you get penalized for it as a policy maker, as a decision maker. We really are not in the learning mode. So we don't look back, we just get on it and do it without looking back, without learning. Would like to see more learning, and what kind of resources are available for this?
Designing. And so with most mixed methods, the qualitative component has always been criticized for the sampling technique and then the sample size. So they say we do purposive sampling and then our sample sizes are relatively small. So then they question the scientificity of our work. They even go to the extent of saying that, oh, so the researcher is part of the analysis. So it's very subjective. How objective can we be? So looking at the qualitative input in the RCT, I'd like to know how we can engage sampling technique and then the sample sizes, comparing it to the relatively larger quantitative sizes.
Thank you, Campbell, for your presentation. Now, your presentation just brings a mark of the need for establishing infrastructure, especially in our national institutions. Because we know very well from his presentation that we need data, we need good data for M&E. And how do you generate that data? You can only do so if you have proper infrastructure. And this infrastructure, especially in upstream research, in our national institutions, you'll agree with me, in Africa, it's lacking. And most of the times we have to carry our samples and do the rest of the analysis outside of Africa. And many a times you don't get this data back. And so, Campbell, when you come to look for data for M&E, then you will not find it. Or you'll find half of it that I have. So all these things, if we have to end up with good evidence information for analysis, then we also have to go back and look at our infrastructure and make sure that as we plan in the funding of, just let me finish, as we build up our evidence for M&E, we also have to look at how do we get this proper data. It is by building up our infrastructure. And not in the international institutions such as ILRI and BEGA and so on, also in our national institutions, where you had her speak in the national institution, and you hear me speak from a national institution. We need our infrastructures established, and then you will get proper data for the M&E to provide your evidence.
Thank you. This is different priorities. When I was at 3IE, we will have a relationship with the Office of Prime Minister in Uganda. I went round with OPM, so 3IE supports the government evaluation facility. 3IE in Uganda only support evaluations approved by the government evaluation facility and the committee that runs that facility. We went around donor after donor saying, please, when you're doing evaluations of Ugandan programs in Uganda, put them through the government evaluation facility. And donor after donor would say, no, we're going to do our own evaluations, our own programs. They're not your programs, they're in Uganda. So I simply don't understand. I'm aware, also like Ken, I'm also white, you've probably noticed. I'm called white, just to make it really obvious. But really this is something that makes me very angry. And this you mentioned this extractive research mentality. We'll just use the Africans to make the tea and collect the data, rather than doing the research here. I just don't understand. You should not allow it to continue, basically. So one thing we did at 3IE was say the research, the grant holder will be the local research institution. It won't be the foreign one. So then you get to dictate how you use the foreign researchers. And we'd like to see more funders saying, give the money to the local research institutions. But that was opposed by my board. It was opposed by our funders. I said, I'm going to do it anyway. So you've got to, you really have to get, I mean, I just don't know, I'm stop ranting. Okay, quick and dirty, right? I'm going to keep ranting. We don't do quick and dirty. And this is why education about quality matters. But the answer to your question is, we need to build up this global repository of knowledge, which is the Campbell Collaboration Library, on what programs are effective. So when a policymaker says, I need an answer this afternoon on this evidence, you can say, actually, here's a study that's looked at 32 studies around the world, and this is what the evidence around the world says. And as we get more with the collaboration of ICID, we get more African synthesis, African evidence, you can say, and this is what the African evidence says. Because there is, coming partly to Andrew's point, there is heterogeneity in the data. There's two answers to you. One is, there is heterogeneity. And when you're doing an evidence synthesis, as long as you have sufficient included studies in your review, heterogeneity is your friend, not your enemy. Because the average treatment effect is not the thing of most interest. It's looking at the variation in the effect size and how to explain that variation in the effect sizes. And that's when you start to see, well, actually, it doesn't work at scale, but it works only in pilots. It's where you see that actually landforms not having an effect in Africa, but having an effect elsewhere. This heterogeneity matters. Back to the culture, and this is to Mercy and Kate's point. So in South Africa, the PDME, the Performance Measurement and what stands for Performance Measurement and Evaluation in the presidency, has this nice slogan of "Don't penalise failure, penalise the failure to learn from failure." Yes. So this is part of changing the culture to be towards use of evidence. It's not collecting evidence; it's the wrong thing. And this is from program managers, and this was when I was at the World Bank. You'll see this time and time again. Program managers would say, why should we do an impact evaluation? Because if we do, we might be found it doesn't work. Because our programs aren't doing them, and they don't know they don't work. But that culture is changing because people are realising that you can actually do these things. There's been massive development of randomised controlled trials in development in the last 10, 15 years. Look at the 3IE database where there's growing number of studies. But the largest growth of RCTs has been in the private sector. So over the last 15 years or so, Google and Microsoft have done around close to 20,000 RCTs, 20,000 of marketing practices, management practices and so on. And what do they find from those 20,000 RCTs? Most things don't work. 80% of things don't work. 80% of businesses go out of business in the first 5 years. That's true, startups back across all countries of the world. 80% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. Do we think government programs do any better? No, of course they don't. There's no bottom line to say they're failing. Impact evaluation is the bottom line for public programs, for donor programs, for government programs. So you need to enforce that bottom line and get the outcomes to show if you're achieving what you said you're going to achieve. So yes, we're going to find failure because most things don't work. You have to shift your attitudes of policymakers to understand that. Parliamentarians, there is an African parliamentarian group, there's a Kenya chapter of it, there's some parliamentarians willing to talk to you, start with them and try and work up from there.
Okay, thank you very much. I think he deserves the Nyayo kind of clap, is it?
Okay. We got this study in Campbell looking just at the quantitative data. Now, as you can probably tell by accent, I'm English, and I like to read English history. The history of England from the 1300s to 1600s is a history of peasant revolt against land privatisation. In Ireland and Scotland in the 1800s, you had massive privatisation of land resulting in mass migration and starvation. So this is not something that necessarily goes down easily. So I asked, but what about those that lose land entitlements? And none of the quantitative studies look at that.